Marcus Williams adjusted the silver cufflinks on his wrists as he stepped into the soft-lit cabin of Flight 247, bound from Los Angeles to New York. The smell of brewed coffee mixed with the hum of air vents and quiet conversation. He was calm, confident, a 38-year-old executive who had made this cross-country trip a dozen times. But this flight would not be like the others. As Marcus placed his leather briefcase in the overhead compartment, he noticed the pilot standing at the cockpit door, greeting passengers. Captain Morrison, tall, broad-shouldered, late 50s, gave a friendly nod to most travelers. But when his eyes landed on Marcus, his smile dimmed just slightly. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass again?" Morrison asked. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "Of course," he said, handing it over. The pilot studied it longer than necessary. Row 1A, first class, paid in full. Morrison's gaze lingered on Marcus' tailored suit, his neatly trimmed beard, and his calm, professional demeanor. Finally, he handed it back. "Everything's in order," he said, forcing a polite grin. Marcus nodded and took his seat. He had long ago learned to read the subtle signs, the double takes, the nervous pauses, the quiet questions that seemed to follow him in certain spaces. He sighed and looked out the window. Across the aisle, flight attendant Jessica Martinez, an 8-year veteran with the airline, noticed the exchange. Something about the pilot's tone didn't sit right with her. She'd seen this before. Authority exercised under the mask of procedure. Turbulence. The flight took off smoothly. The cabin dimmed, passengers settled in, and a soft melody played through the speakers. Marcus opened his laptop and began reviewing a presentation for a major investment meeting. 2 hours in, turbulence struck. The plane jolted suddenly, rattling trays and startling passengers. A few gasps rippled through the cabin. In the second row, an elderly woman struggled with her cup of hot tea, her hands shaking. Without thinking, Marcus unbuckled his belt, stood, and steadied the cup before it could spill on her lap. "You're all right," he said gently. "Thank you, dear," she whispered, smiling with relief. The lights flickered once, then steadied. But moments later, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Please remain seated. We're addressing a minor situation in the cabin." Jessica frowned. Minor situation. She hadn't reported anything. A few minutes later, Captain Morrison himself emerged from the cockpit, scanning the rows like a detective searching for a suspect. His eyes locked on Marcus. "Sir," he said sharply, "you were moving around during turbulence. That's a direct safety violation." Marcus turned slowly to face him. "I was helping a passenger," he replied evenly. "She almost burned herself." Morrison's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't need excuses. You could have endangered everyone on board." Whispers filled the cabin. Passengers stared. A confrontation in first class was a rare sight. "Captain," Jessica interjected carefully, "he was only assisting. That'll be all, Ms. Martinez," Morrison snapped without looking at her. Marcus felt the heat rise in his chest. Had dealt with bias before, but this was humiliation disguised as authority. Still, he kept his composure. "With respect, Captain, I did nothing wrong," he said. Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Well, handle this properly when we land," he said, turning on his heel and marching back toward the cockpit. The cabin fell silent. Jessica stood frozen, hands trembling slightly as she collected empty cups. The elderly woman reached over and squeezed Marcus' hand. "Don't let him scare you," she whispered. Marcus smiled faintly. "I won't." Grounded 3 hours later, Flight 247 touched down at JFK Airport. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and passengers reached for their bags until two uniformed airport security officers boarded the plane. The air shifted instantly. "Mr. Marcus Williams," one officer called. Marcus looked up. "Yes. You'll need to come with us for questioning." The cabin erupted in whispers. "Questioning? What for?" Jessica froze mid-step, eyes wide. "This is wrong," she muttered. Marcus inhaled slowly, then stood. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, sir, the officer said stiffly. Every phone in first class rose like a wave. Passengers filming as Marcus, calm and dignified, followed the officers down the narrow aisle. Jessica's heart ached. She'd seen the whole thing. And she knew. This wasn't justice, it was bias in uniform. Interrogation in a sterile airport room. Marcus sat silently as the officers reviewed notes on their tablets. No reports of threats. No complaints from passengers. Just a safety concern flagged by Captain Morrison. After 30 tense minutes, one of the officers sighed. Sir, it appears there's been a misunderstanding. You're free to go. Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. I know. Outside the terminal, Jessica ran up to him. Mr. Williams? She called. He turned, weary but composed. I'm so sorry, she said, voice shaking. I saw everything. What he did was wrong. Marcus gave a tired smile. Thank you. But this kind of thing happens more often than you'd think. Then let's make sure it ends with you, Jessica said firmly. Marcus looked at her, really looked, and saw the determination in her eyes. All right, he said. Let's make sure it does. The video 2 weeks later, a video surfaced online, recorded quietly by a passenger in first class. It showed Marcus helping the elderly woman. Then Captain Morrison storming down the aisle. The clip exploded across social media. This man helped an old lady and got detained for it. When being kind becomes suspicious. This is racial profiling at 30,000 feet. Within 48 hours, national news networks were replaying the footage. Morning shows debated airline bias and unconscious fear. Marcus' calm composure became a symbol of quiet resistance. The airline released a bland statement. Greater than we take all safety concerns seriously, and are conducting an internal review. But the public wasn't buying it. Hashtags began trending. Justice for Marcus, Fly Fair, Biasintheski. Then Jessica came forward publicly. She appeared on live TV, nervous but resolute. I've worked with Captain Morrison for years, she said, has experienced, but what he did that day was wrong. Marcus Williams did nothing but help another passenger. Her words shifted the narrative completely. Accountability under pressure. The airline suspended Captain Morrison pending investigation. Executives scrambled to control the damage, while lawyers quietly reached out to Marcus offering settlements, generous ones. But Marcus refused. I don't want money, he said during an interview on CNN. I want accountability. Days later, he held a press conference in Manhattan. The room overflowed with reporters, cameras flashing. Marcus stood behind the podium, wearing a charcoal suit, his voice calm but powerful. One didn't board that flight expecting to make headlines, he began. I boarded as a paying passenger, a professional, and a human being. What happened on Flight 247 was not about safety. It was about perception and bias. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. Applause erupted. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt something like peace. The hearing a month later, the Federal Aviation Review Board opened a formal hearing. Jessica testified first, her voice unwavering. Marcus Williams acted with kindness and respect. The captain's response was based on prejudice, not policy. Next, the elderly passenger, Mrs. Henderson, stepped forward. If that man hadn't stood up, I would have been burned, she said. He saved me. When Captain Morrison was called, his confidence cracked. Maybe I overreacted, he muttered, avoiding eye contact. The board's decision was unanimous. Captain Morrison was terminated for misconduct and racial discrimination. The airline issued a public apology and announced a new initiative on anti-bias and sensitivity training. But for Marcus, the true victory was deeper. He had not just cleared his name. He had forced an entire industry to confront its reflection. New beginnings. Months passed. Marcus returned to his routine, though nothing about his life felt routine anymore. Strangers stopped him on the street to thank him. Parents wrote letters saying his story gave their kids courage. One evening, he sat in a quiet Brooklyn coffee shop, scrolling through messages on his phone. One read, Greater than you showed the world that dignity is stronger than prejudice. Thank you. Jessica walked in and joined him at his table. You know, she said, you could have taken the settlement, disappeared, and moved on. But you didn't. Marcus smiled. Some things are bigger than comfort. You changed more than you realize, she said softly. He looked out the window at the city skyline glowing against the night. Maybe, he said, but I just did what was right. Jessica nodded. Sometimes, that's all it takes. Epilogue: the video of Flight 247 became one of the most watched clips of the year. It sparked policy reforms, congressional hearings, and a national conversation about race and bias in air travel. Marcus later founded Equal Wings, a non-profit organization that advocates for fair treatment of passengers and airline employees alike. Every time he boarded a plane after that, he still felt the familiar gaze of strangers, but this time, the feeling carried something new, not fear, not tension, pride. He had turned pain into purpose. As the engines roared to life on another flight months later, Marcus glanced out the window. Clouds drifting by in endless white waves. Somewhere high above the earth, justice had found its wings.